Good evening, everyone. Now, I would like to call this morning's meeting to order now. We have 5 panelists, so the session may be longer than the one we had yesterday and the one we are to have this afternoon.
Le thème de notre panel,
The topic of this panel, let me read it in English.
Resilience, Protection and Development. Pour nous entretenir de ce sujet,
To introduce the topic, we will see that we almost have parity on the podium. We have a gender balance here. The first speaker is Mr. Ahmad Rwaidy, followed by Mrs. Nur Arafeh, and then we'll have Mrs. Lubna Shaheen. After Mrs. Shaheen's presentation, we will have a coffee break, and when we come back from the coffee break, we will have the communication of Mr. Ekubaje John from the African Union and of Professor Babakar Diop. Then we will open the floor for discussions. Now, before we start, I would like to remind speakers, invite speakers to limit their presentations to 15 minutes, maximum 15 minutes, because the interpreters are watching us and want us to keep to the time. And I would like to inform participants that out of respect for the environment, the number of copies, hard copies available have been really restricted. But you can get them on the website on www.municipal.org. Now, without further ado, I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Ahmad Rwaidy, who is now the director of the office of the ICO conference, ICO cooperation body. He was head of the Palestinian office in charge of Jerusalem and headed the multi-sectoral development approach to Eastern Jerusalem, and supervised the drafting on the document. Mr. Rwaidy was born in Jerusalem. He is a lawyer by training. He's also an activist, and he defended Palestinians before the Israeli courts. Mr. Rwaidy, it is for us a great pleasure to welcome you. You have the floor. Thank you.
In the name of God Almighty, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fact, this morning, I would like to start by thanking the Republic of Senegal for hosting this important conference, as well as the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People of the United Nations, as well as the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation for organizing this conference. Before I speak about the Jerusalem needs within the plan that was organized with the European Union, which specifies the developmental needs in 11 sectors, I'd have to speak about the nature of the city for you to understand its needs. We speak of East Jerusalem, which is 72 kilometers in space. The population is 340,000 as residents and not citizens. Hence, the Israeli law is imposed on them, which is called the Israeli Access Law of 1952, that gives the right to the Israeli Minister of the Interior to revoke the residency of any citizen of Jerusalem for any reason he deems appropriate, as specified by Order Number 11, whose center of life is beyond Jerusalem, for example, which means that any person who resides in Jerusalem, any Palestinian who lives there, has to prove each time he has any transaction with the Ministry of the Interior in Israel that he has the right to residency there, or else it would be revoked. The old city, it's only 1 square kilometer. Yesterday, Mr. Khalil showed you the maps, but the Palestinian population is 37,000 who live in this narrow area, which is the heart of the city and the center of trade and development, considering its proximity to the religious sites of Muslims and Christians alike. Hence, it is also the center of Palestinian tourism, and development should have been based on tourism in the first place. The Israeli law was imposed on the Palestinians in Jerusalem. Thus, the people of Jerusalem, as a result, had to follow the civil services and the judicial courts of Israel, which meant that in each matter that's related to their lives, they have to deal with the Israeli courts and authorities. Israel, as you know, does not have a constitution, but has statutes, including one which is related to Jerusalem, which is considered to be the unified capital, and it stipulates in its provisions that it's a center of a political decision making there, especially as the Knesset is based there. Hence, Palestinians in this respect are not owners. There are 26 laws which I enumerated myself in a book on the legal status of property in Jerusalem, which aims to expel the people of Jerusalem from their own city. The city is besieged by the separation wall, in addition to a settlement, one that is surrounding it from all corners. And even more seriously, in the eastern part, there is the Iwan scheme, which would violate Jerusalem from the West Bank and would stop any communication between the West Bank and Jerusalem. Gaza, of course, cannot have access there, so the citizens would be deprived from reaching Jerusalem, although it used to be, before 67 until 91, it used to be the center of political, cultural, and media life, in addition to all the syndicates and all authorities that help the Palestinian society, and especially the Jerusalem one. In addition to the international organization, there are 9 consulates there that are based there, in addition to the Quartet and the EU and several international organizations such as UNRWA are all based there. Not to mention that our people on the West Bank and Gaza cannot reach the places of worship for Muslims and Christians. As a result of imposing the Israeli laws, among those laws is one that is called the Law of Organization and Construction, that prevents Palestinians and restricts their right to have construction permits, and it was enforced in 1965. 12% of the of the area is restricted to is accorded to Palestinians, and on the other hand, the settlers could apply very easily, and their requests are granted very easily, unlike the Palestinians who could wait for years until they get even one license for the establishment of one property. The majority of Palestinians have, as a result, built without a license. There are about 20,000 buildings over there that were constructed without a license and are under the threat of being demolished. Each month, 7 to 10 houses in Jerusalem are being demolished by the Israeli authorities. In addition to the demolition and the settlement activities, the Palestinian authorities in Jerusalem abide by the Israeli law and have to have a work permit by the Israeli authorities. As a result, some authorities have voluntarily left the city, and others have continued to work in the cultural, health and education, economic and tourist fields. But I remind that 24 Palestinian institutions are closed by virtue of Israeli decision that is being renewed once every 6 months, including Beit al-Sharq and the Arab Studies Association. That was the title of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process that was launched in Madrid. Not to mention social and sports organizations, and even the Alliance of Clubs in Jerusalem, which represents sports in the city, is also closed by virtue of an Israeli decision, which contradicts with the Oslo Agreement and the message given by Shimon Peres in 1994 that provided for the importance of maintaining sports activities and cultural activities in the cities. However, they are still closed until now by virtue of an Israeli decision. As a result of those factors that I mentioned in brief, the siege that the city is living has risen the rates of poverty and unemployment. According to the UNDP statistics, the highest percentages of poverty and unemployment are in the city of Jerusalem. In addition to the uprising, the popular uprising that took place last October, that has led to the laying off of a number of Palestinian workers who work in the West Bank, or they are being threatened due to threats to be killed, as what has happened to some of the youth, including martyr Ahmad Abu Sha'ban, who used to work in West Jerusalem. He was shot by one of the settlers and died during the latest popular uprising because he had an Arab appearance. And I remind, now that I'm speaking about martyrs, that the 15 Palestinian martyrs from Jerusalem, Israel still refuses to hand them over to their families, and they are kept in fridges under a temperature of 70 below zero. And one of the martyrs was handed over to his family. His family refused to receive him because he was totally covered with ice and his family could not identify him. Hence, all martyrs who died in the West Bank, around 70 in number, 15 were from Jerusalem. Until now, their dead bodies were not delivered. And there is a court case on that subject that will be reviewed by Israeli courts, but I don't expect too much from it. What we need in Jerusalem is a scheme to support resilience. We cannot speak of an absolute development under the occupation laws and the imposition of the administrative and legal law of Israel. That's why we spoke about the multi-sectoral scheme that was organized by the Jerusalem unit of the Palestinian presidency in cooperation with an international team that I was honored to chair. They took into account that Jerusalem is under occupation and that Israel, the occupying power, imposes its laws as an occupier. How could we keep the demographic development of Palestine under such circumstances? The institutions of the city could never develop in light of such circumstances. Usually the capital is the center of the presidency, of the parliament, but inside of Jerusalem we have numerous problems, including, of course, the presence of the occupation. 11 municipalities were included that were centered on several fields such as women, sports, development. I will tackle two of them due to the lack of time. The first is related to the education sector, which is a pivotal one in Jerusalem. Israel attempts to put an end to Palestinian education and to control the education sector and imposing the Israeli curricula. In this respect, it tried to close Palestinian schools under the municipality of education in Jerusalem and to prevent the establishment of any Palestinian schools. We are in need of about 9,000 Palestinian students are in need of being enrolled in schools, but the Israeli occupation prevents that, and it imposes on some schools some restrictions, including the attempts to introduce the Israeli high school diploma in addition to the Palestinian one, in order to turn the Palestinian into an Israeli education system in an attempt to obliterate the identity, the Palestinian identity. Hence, the education sector is in dire need of support. The second field is the tourism. Jerusalem is a tourist city par excellence, and it has Islamic and Christian religious sites and sites of worship, and it could boost the whole of the state of Palestine. However, the Israeli occupation prohibits the issuance of license. It has given permits to establish a series of Israeli hotels on the separation line between East and West Jerusalem, and has denied the Palestinian side the same right. We are trying to boost tourism in the future, and as the OIC is one of the organizers of this conference, I call upon visiting Jerusalem as a part of the pilgrimage system. As people do the pilgrimage in Mecca, they could continue their trip with a visit to Al-Aqsa Mosque. There is no reason why this cannot happen. We welcomed the religious opinion that was issued in Kuwait, and that was issued in the Jerusalem conference in Amman 2 years ago, that has given the green light to visiting Jerusalem for all Muslims. Hence, we extend an open invitation in order to develop life in all its sectors that could be developed through tourism. We will reduce unemployment and give the trade and development a boost, whether in the city or in the whole of the state of Palestine. Due to the lack of time, I would like to speak only in brief about culture in Jerusalem. Also, culture is subjected to a threat of being closed. For example, Hakawati Theater and other theaters, the Edward Said Institute and other cultural institutions. Some of those activities are prohibited inside of Jerusalem, although they are related just to singing. Even the Palestinian sports team cannot play in Jerusalem. In a match, the Israeli army has raided the playground and put an end to the match. Three types of support could be given to Jerusalem. The official support by the ministry related to Jerusalem affairs, which helps the victims, the houses of whom are demolished and the properties of whom are confiscated, and to provide urgent assistance to the traders whose properties have been confiscated or stores have been closed, but this only covers 15 to 20% of those in need. Some Arab and Islamic organizations also provide some support to those businesses, but it only covers 10% of the needs. There is an international support by the EU and other international organizations, and we have an international agreement signed between the EU and the Palestinian president to support Jerusalem, but it does not meet the needs, maybe 5% of the needs of the city. So let's turn discussion in this panel into practical steps to support resilience. Human resilience is a human right. And civil society organizations from Senegal can help Jerusalem and support it. And as the chairman mentioned, I am currently the chairman of the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation Representative Office in Jerusalem, and we could cooperate with Senegal for the sake of Jerusalem. And I welcome you to the city of Jerusalem anytime you want, and God willing, this city will see the light and be free. Thank you.
Je voudrais remercier M. Rwaidy pour son exposé très instructif. Et M. Rwaidy, je tiens à vous remercier au nom du comité.
Mr. Rwaidy, I thank you on behalf of the committee for having agreed to share this experience, the knowledge that you have of the situation in Jerusalem. We are talking about sustainable life, inclusive life, through the development of education and tourism. We're talking about access to the various praying sites. But from your presentation, it seems that all that became very difficult, if not impossible.
What can be done by the international community? We're going to come back to that during our discussions.
I'd now like to give the floor to Ms. Nur Arafeh. She's a policy fellow of Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. She previously worked as a researcher at Birzeit University, as an associate researcher at the Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute, and as a lecturer in economics at Al-Quds University. Her main research interests include the political economy of development in the Middle East, sociology and politics of development, and economic forms of resistance. Madam, you have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. So my name is Nur Arafeh, and I'm the Policy Fellow of Al-Shabaka, the Palestinian Policy Network. It's a virtual think tank whose mission is to shape the Palestinian policy debate by drawing upon and building upon the vast experience of Palestinians in strategy development, and by communicating alternative strategies and policy recommendations to different policy communities in Palestine and the rest of the world. So I'll be talking today about frameworks for promoting development in East Jerusalem. In 1988, economist Youssef Sayer stated that, I'm quoting, "meaningful and far-reaching development cannot be achieved or even sought under the conditions of dependence and dispossession," end of quote. But does this mean that we should not pursue development while living under occupation and the settler colonial regime? Or should we rather revisit our development approach and think about forms of development that are in line with our liberation struggle? So in this presentation, after critically reviewing the different development frameworks that are undertaken in East Jerusalem, and I'll only focus on the Palestinian Authority and Israel because I know that my colleague Lubna will be talking about the UN, I will attempt to propose a new development framework and a new international paradigm based on respect for human rights. So first of all, let's take a step backward and review the development situation in East Jerusalem. As you all know, East Jerusalem was the commercial, tourism, and cultural heart of the Palestinian nation. However, it has been separated from the economies of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and has been integrated into the Israeli economy in a very distorted and partial way. It has thus become increasingly dependent on the Israeli economy in terms of labor, trade, and finance. This marginalization of East Jerusalem's economy was caused by Israel's pernicious policies of annexation, isolation, and disintegration. As a result, East Jerusalem has been in a development limbo, and the socioeconomic conditions have been in precipitous decline. In 2015, the poverty rate was 75%, with almost 80% of Palestinian children living in East Jerusalem under the poverty line. By contrast, only 21.8% of residents in Israel and 30% of their children lived below the poverty line in the same year. Unemployment rates are also very high at 19%, and they are the highest among the educated and